Hey, it's Ryan Dahl, and we are back with Praise Charts Live and my good friend Cliff Duren. And today we're going to be talking about the worship leading orchestra, how to grow your church with a worship leading orchestra. So I don't know how many of you out there have any instruments in your worship team that would go beyond the bass guitar and drums, acoustic guitar, electric guitar, and piano. Beyond that, there is so much to explore with brass and wind and strings and other types of rhythm instruments. The beauty of it is that once you open yourself up to all these instruments, there are so many more people, young people, old people, lots of people have skills in playing these instruments and just don't know where they can fit into this whole modern worship era. So that is kind of exactly why Praise Charts exists at the heart of it. Beyond all the chord charts and lead sheets and things like that, the niche little era that we're super passionate about is providing music so that more of these different musicians can come and enjoy being a part of participating in the worship experience in this day and age, in 2021, sounding like we're in the era of 2021. So we're going to talk with Cliff Duren, who is one of the premier prominent church arrangers. He arranges and orchestrates hundreds and hundreds of songs and is really well versed at this whole topic. So he's a great guy, good friend. So please welcome with me, Cliff Duren. Cliff, so great to have you here with us today. Once again, I think we did this last week. We talked all about the choir and tons of people. Man, I realized I was looking with a celebrity, just how many people were interested in you. So here we are again, man.
Getting invited one time is a plus, and getting invited back, like I
I
don't
know.
even know what to do with that.
I know.
So
It's kind of, that's how it goes. Okay, well, let's dive in. People that know me, especially in the praise charts world, I have this kind of like quirky obsession or fascination with the church orchestra. And I think it goes back to my very early days when I just loved watching, like, I love sheet music. I love notes on a page. And I especially love, this is one little exercise I like to do, is to listen to an orchestration and have all the music in front of me and watch the notes kind of going on the page and seeing how the arranger interpreted all that music and put that kind of pen to page. It's work that you're familiar with. You stare at these notes and rhythms all day long. But
yeah,
I commend you, man, because you're one of the reasons that hundreds, if not thousands of people have something to do on a Sunday morning, because you're giving them something to play. And I'm with you in that whole journey of creating a space for them. So,
well, it's an absolute honor.
mm-hmm.
I grew up in the school band. I played tuba, and I think about the thousands of people like myself, who maybe had that outlet through their school, but maybe didn't. I didn't grow up in a church with an orchestra, but now obviously serve in a church with one, and to see how many more people are able to be involved,
Mm-hmm.
and to bring those gifts that were stewarded as students and teenagers, maybe even into college, and to be able to use those for the Lord, in Sunday morning worship and beyond is super special, I think, and I feel like the Lord's honored,
Yeah.
when we can take those gifts and bring those instruments into the
Yeah.
house of the Lord. So
Amen. There's great passages like in Psalm, I think it's 149 or 150, where it just talks about all the different instruments and describes them all in detail. Now, back in the day, they were like the lyre in different forms, but it's still strings attached to wood and strung up with a bit of tension, and there you
yeah,
go. It's like whatever you want to call it. There's that and brass, wind, and various things like that. So that's what we want to kind of go in today. Well, I want to kind of get down into the nitty gritty. So if you're interested in this, if you're listening in how you can incorporate some additional instruments and still retain that kind of sound, whatever it is that you want, Because I can just imagine you don't want to sound like, the church orchestra that feels like you're just playing these sort of boring, melodic notes that are maybe they used to be attached to the back of your hymnal, and it's like there was no like arrangement and design and flow and all of that. So I'm really about having you help you add these instruments and still retain that core sound that you want. So I know you're about that too, Cliff. So let's just talk
Absolutely.
about I don't know, like where to start. Maybe we could just start with that. Is let's say you don't have an orchestra and you're thinking, well, how do I even start? Where would I begin in starting to bring in some additional instruments? Do you have some ideas about that? Like just let's think about talking to someone who doesn't have any of these instruments on their band. Where's a good
Yeah.
starting place?
I think the hardest thing about church orchestra is starting one,
Hmm.
because, find me a church where, the correct instrumentation of people shows up,
Right.
at the first rehearsal, to make it happen. And so, getting it off the ground is a real challenge. Because it's such a wide array of instruments, and it's unlikely that you have all of those represented right off the bat. When you're
Yeah.
getting started. However, I mean, I have known of several new church plants, who like those people, those instrumentalists are who the Lord are bringing, to that church and to that church plant. And so it's not an established church only kind of territory. You're seeing
Hmm.
these spring up all over the place. And um, getting started is the hardest part. You have to definitely get over that hurdle of, okay, my orchestra week one may be, one
A
trumpet,
tuba.
and it maybe I may show up. I mean, you never
That's
know.
right.
So I think tuba is. I'm waiting on a translation to come out where Psalm 150 mentions the tuba
Yeah, exactly.
specifically. And it's going to happen one day. So it's a few things come into play there. One, uh, how it's mixed in with the rest of the rhythm section is obviously a big deal. Um, if your band is already accustomed to using stems, using multi tracks, honestly, it's easier now than ever to get an orchestra off the ground, because you're able to supplement the parts of the orchestra you don't have, maybe, so that
Yeah.
way your players don't feel exposed. They don't feel like
Right.
they're driving the mix, or like all alone playing the fifth of a chord,
Yeah.
without anything around it. Like there's some comfort in adding. And so it's definitely made it easier for small orchestras to thrive, and for new orchestras to get started with some support like that. But
Hmm.
if you don't have that, it's just making sure that your audio engineer is really familiar with how to mic and how to mix in the orchestra with your established rhythm section.
Yeah. I think I'd like to also encourage people that let's not just think the church orchestra has to be, 10 or 15 or 20 instruments and can easily be two or three. Like that's just, we're talking about where to start. Start with what you have. It might even be one trumpet and then it becomes two trumpets or something, but you have to like start somewheres. So nobody is saying it has to be like the orchestra pit, right? And then it's a matter of taking Cliff's really wise insight there to it's figuring out how to mix them in. And in our modern age, that's very accessible to be able to create a mix so that they don't feel kind of exposed. Because some of these instruments are quite piercing. They don't just blend like a trumpet. You're going to know when the trumpet is blasting out that note. So that is
Absolutely. And
definitely.
choosing the music is obviously a big deal. I would not recommend Sunday number one, starting with a huge orchestra prelude and you've got three people, like ease them into what you're already doing. And
Yeah.
as the group grows and is established, there's all kinds of literature out there for different size groups that you can start to have those preludes if you want that orchestra feature kind of moment. But, in the
Hmm.
meantime, while you're building, choose carefully, choose music wisely, and yeah, you're exactly right. Depending on what the instrument is, even if you just had one instrument, well, you know, have that instrument uh, play a feature with your rhythm section for a prelude or for an offertory, depending
Yeah.
on what your worship service style is, and find some creative ways there to plug in, one at a time and build from there.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk a little bit about the need, like the more instruments you bring in, especially the more orchestral instruments, you can't. Well, this is the challenge I think I want to chat about is can the song still flow and vibe, or some people want to just be spontaneous or do like, oh, it's just let's just know what the verse and chords or chorus chords are and then just go from there. You can't really do that when you have an orchestra. You got to kind of follow the map, right? However, even with our charts in particular, we've tried to write them in such a way that even with an orchestra, you have these marking points where you can know where you are and hopefully adapt at some level. But let's maybe just talk about that. Some of the basic approaches to music, the more instruments that you have to be able to read music. You need to follow an arrangement so everyone stays on that same page.
Sure. At First Baptist Woodstock, we have two services. One with just a band, and the MD, you know, he can just call number chords, and into the band's
Yeah.
ears. They can, repeat as needed and stuff like that. Obviously, yeah, there's some, you know, I wouldn't even call them limitations. It's just a different approach when you
Yeah.
add. The more people you add, the more differently you have to think, and so that's definitely the case with an orchestra. But you're right. I mean, in our scenario, our orchestra, they are playing with ear monitors. So our MD, who is our instrumental director, Trey Tanner, does a fantastic job here, and he can communicate with the orchestra. He talks to them in measure numbers or in sections, like you mentioned, and so
Yeah.
if we do repeat back to something, if the pastor, wants us to sing more and we're, kind of on the fly from that point, he can communicate with them in a way that they can stay connected and stay involved with what's going
Yeah.
on. And so there's some definite ways to do that. Obviously, even just the things I mentioned in one sentence require, the right technology and the right investment in monitoring. And so that may not be, your initial, starting point,
Hmm.
but yeah, even just having sections marked, if trying to move freely and maybe be a little less structured, in your worship planning is the way you plan. I would challenge you to think through that in some different ways as you add instruments. I mean, think about what's the best win, obviously, for the worship service, but what's the best win for all of these people that the Lord has sent our way. And so, we spend weeks kind of walking through each worship service here, and it's for that reason. Like we plan it, and then we come back and revisit it the next week and make
Hmm.
sure, do these transitions feel right? Are we sure our church really loves this song? Are we sure that we don't want to go ahead and kind of plan, hey, we're going to go back to bar 70 and
Yeah.
play that a second time. So we try to be preemptive with some of those things because, again, it just helps our people when, it's a success and a win for
Yeah.
everybody if they know how to stay plugged in.
Yeah. Very good. Hey, so you're telling me that you have two services. Sounds like one of your services has an orchestra, the other one doesn't. Tell me about that. Like, what are there two different types of people that you're trying to reach, or is it two different kinds of sounds? What would you say are some of the differences since you live in both worlds, the orchestra and non-orchestra world?
Yeah, that's a great question. Historically, that's been the model here at First Woodstock for about the last 15 years. We've had two different style worship services, and initially, space was a part of that, and then just giving people more options was a part of that too. We have like our Sunday school small group ministry is really big here, and so we found that if we could offer two worship services and two or three Sunday school hours all at the same time, it just gives people more flexibility with their schedule. If their
Hmm.
kids are up at the crack of dawn every day, every Sunday, then they may be on the early side where, some would prefer to come later. So really, it just gave our people more options. Not necessarily, I don't think the drive was to chase a different, group of people or
I
culture.
see.
Our services are both generationally really healthy, so
Hmm.
it's not an age divide for us. Our choir and orchestra service is not traditional by the most common definition.
I
So
see.
a lot of the songs between the two services overlap. I mean, we're using a lot of the same content. It just feels different,
Right.
with a choir and orchestra involved. And so yeah, that was the main impetus. And so we could have launched both services and kept them both with choir and orchestra, but we opted to not divide our choir and orchestra, between two services and keep
Right.
one where all those people are committed to the service, and then the second one to change the feel a little bit with a
Yeah.
band and a few singers.
I think that's a bit of the stereotype I want to break, is that just because you have an orchestra, it doesn't mean you can't have that, modern sound or contemporary sound or whatever it is that feels like we're a part of this era. It doesn't mean, and especially I think services like praise charts are really trying to help uh, like modern worshiping churches have a wider scope of instruments that they can have involved in their worship and kind of harness that sound. I guess you must just know about that as an arranger, an orchestrator. Like, are you kind of intentionally trying to shape the instruments to serve a particular sound or style, or what is that style that you're trying to go after with the orchestra?
Yeah, that's a great question. That really is in my mind, the difference maker in, you know, appropriately using an orchestra. Let's say your service is like ours and it's very, you know, um, open-ended style-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you sing, a hymn every week, or maybe some weeks you don't, or like I love not having a lid on our service stylistically, and
Yeah.
so in that approach, I mean, how the songs are orchestrated is a really big deal. If you, I mean, this Sunday we're going to sing, the CC Winans tune "Believe" for it, and so that's a
Nice. Yeah.
modern song our orchestra will play, but it's been orchestrated carefully to not change the original feel of the artist version, and so it's
Yeah.
made to complement it. It's made for the big sections to feel a little bigger because the orchestra is there. And so there's definitely, and there are so many great orchestrators writing for the church who think
Yeah.
about things like that,
Yeah.
who don't want to overwrite to get in the way of what's going on or to change the sound of a song, but just to complement it and add
Mm-hmm.
to it.
It might be that if you're someone listening and you're wanting to use an orchestrator, you may just need to start paying a little more attention to the arranger, not just the artist. Like, Believe for it, it's a great album, and we know that it's CC Winans that sang the song, but then you need to pay attention to, so who did arrange it, because that's going to make a difference. And when you start to develop a little confidence in whether it's Cliff, or I see Daniel Simpson is listening in here. He's a great arranger. Dan Galbraith, who's done tons of charts. Now, you might like or not like them, but as you play a couple of their charts and you sort of develop that affinity towards someone who is really helping to shape your sound as much as the artist is, singing the song and shaping the nature of the song. So that's just kind of like a new thing to be paying attention to. So,
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
let's get a little deeper into the orchestra. Just imagining you're at orchestra practice, you're sitting in front of your giant, podium or whatever it is. And when I think of an orchestra, I think of the brass, the rhythm section, of course, and then there's the brass, wind, strings, and percussion. Would I be right? And is that like a fair division of your scope of instruments?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay,
That's right.
so let's talk about those. Now I'm going to skip over the rhythm for now, and we'll just kind of focus in on the brass. But let's just think about the brass instruments. I want to go into each one and talk about how they sound, how you lead them, how you speak to them. I know there's some certain things you've got to know musically about how you're communicating to someone playing, on a trumpet. It's like they're in a different key. Shoot, what are they even reading? Is that the same music I'm reading? All that kind of questions. So let's break it down. Let's start with the brass, okay? What instruments are we talking about in the brass section to start?
Yeah, so in the brass family, your basic setup is trumpets, trombones, tuba, and French horns. Now, you
Yeah,
could have a euphonium or a baritone in the mix that would, be in that same trombone family as far
yeah,
as range and sound in general. But that's your basic, when we record orchestras, that's the basic brass setup. We write for three trumpets, three trombones, and tuba, and typically two to three French horn parts. Pending the style of the song and really what the publisher or the client is looking for. So, yeah, but they really each do have their own sound. If I'm orchestrating a song that you know is a little more pop or maybe more gospel and has more brass licks in it, trombones and trumpets are going to play a lot more than the tuba is. Like your
yeah.
tuba is, it's not your lick instrument. Neither is your, uh, you know, I mean, maybe it is somewhere,
Unless you
but
only have a tuba, in which case it is your lick instrument.
yeah, unless he's the guy who plays on Jimmy Fallon show, he
That's
can
right.
do anything. But
Yeah.
so I'm gonna write less for that instrument. I'm gonna let him play when he can, and when they're playing in more of like a brass choir or in a
Yeah.
chord kind of setup. But and then your French horns, it's interesting to be in the brass family, but they almost um, can serve more of the string family, like
Yes.
you. I mean, you could have French horns are like violins. I mean, you could have as many of them as
Truly.
you want, and they only just get more lush. The more you
Yeah.
have involved. As opposed to where if you just keep adding trumpets and trombones, it could just get really piercing or just overwhelming. French horns, the sound just gets fatter, just gets
Yeah.
wider the more you add. So it's a really unique instrument in the
Yeah.
middle of the brass family. So they're typically not playing anything like the rest of the brass section. I mean,
Right.
if you're looking at a score, at first glance, you may think, oh, is that a brass instrument? Because they're on a totally different path, in the context of the song than everybody else. But
Mm-hmm.
it's because they just function differently. It's more likely for me to have them even assisting or adding to a string line, pending on the range, than it would be for them to be partnered hand in hand doing the same thing with the rest of the brass section.
Oh, I actually never thought of it that way, but that's so insightful just to understand because, the brass can really bring that. They used to call it the Tower of Power, Chicago. I
Yeah,
mean,
man.
we're talking like secular bands would use the brass to just bring that kind of funky, rhythmic, da da da, and kind of all
Right.
those that, I mean, if some churches, gospel-oriented churches, could just come alive with a live brass section, it just super inspiring. So I love
Well, and
that.
it doesn't take
Yeah.
many people, again, back to, what
Yeah.
we were talking about. I mean, some of the best, some of the best concerts I've ever been to that had brass involved just had a few players. I mean, I've
Yeah.
seen James Taylor with just three brass instruments on
Yeah.
stage, or Stevie Wonder with like 6 to 8 horns up there, and I mean they're adding so much, but there's not that many of them. So
Right.
you said it well for this massive group of orchestral members on the stage, and that's not necessarily a must, to have a successful orchestra and a great sound.
Yeah. Now with those brass instruments, I think that the trumpet is a B flat instrument, but the trombones are C, and then your French horn is an F. So you're like just within the brass, you're all over the map. If you are, if you are slightly dyslexic like I am, you're gonna get messed up. But just give us in the 1 minute, straighten that out for us. How do you think about what keys they're playing in?
Oh, in
What's your
one,
tricks?
oh man, it's funny. My undergrad is at a school that really just had vocal and piano majors, and
Yeah.
the orchestration class. Really, we spent the whole semester trying to educate singers on what all those transposed instruments mean, and
Yeah.
why somebody ever thought that was a good idea, and stuff like that. So it's really funny. So yeah, 1 minute's gonna be tough, but
Okay.
um, yeah, but mainly, those are to try to fit the main range of each instrument, where it's on the staff, where they're not just
Right.
spending time in ledger line land, above or below. And so offering, them and keys that fits their range and makes the music more accessible. I mean, that's a huge part of why instruments are set up like that, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, I'll just give you a little secret here, just for us today. I mean, when I'm orchestrating, I orchestrate in concert pitch just to avoid, miswriting, and honestly, it helps me write more quickly and effectively, to
Mm-hmm.
not have to like think, a second step of like, what key is this instrument family in. So I write, if the song's in B flat, I'm looking at every instrument in B flat, and
Yeah.
then at the end, praise the Lord for finale
Yeah.
software.
Yeah.
I click one button, and then it looks like it's supposed to look for each instrument.
And just like a real quick, this was the 1 minute thing, is if you're playing a song in B flat, your trumpet's in C, right? And your
Exactly.
French horn is in what key? What's your,
Uh,
would
if
that be
you're in,
E flat? If you're in B flat, see, this is it. This is the problem we have. Even Cliff
exactly,
doesn't know.
yeah, that's that's correct. When you put me on the spot here, I feel like
Yeah.
I need to have a score in front of me.
Think about
So
it for a second. But if you're in B flat, what's the answer? What's your French horn in? If it's an
your
F
first
instrument.
horn is in E flat. It's a fourth
E
F,
flat.
right?
Okay. Well, I don't know. You're the orchestrator. Okay. Well, if you're listening, I mean, these are things you want to have straight, because when you're sitting on the podium in front of your, musicians, you want to be able to know that. And also, it could be one of the reasons why, if you're playing with an orchestra, you might not play in the key of B. You might choose B flat, just because if you're playing in B, you're forcing your trumpet to play in D flat, right? Or C sharp. And it just gets to be like a lot of sharps to keep track of.
Yeah, the issue for sure, especially when you get into church music. I mean, orchestra members don't like to hear this, but you know, you have to think about the singer first, and
Right.
that's never
Yeah.
good news to an orchestra member. But it means that there may be some challenges there. There may be some challenging keys, especially as your song possibly you know, modulates, there's a key change in the middle, something like that.
Yeah.
At some point, some instrument in the orchestra is going to be out of their comfort zone. Hey, I
Right.
did
Right.
just pull up a score because you were making me nervous. So
Put you on the spot.
yeah, so no, French horns are a fifth above the original key. So if you're in B flat, um,
It's
I
F.
was thinking down a fourth, but it's up
Uh
of
oh.
yeah, yeah. So you're not a fourth, you're a fifth.
I can't
Uh,
believe I asked the Cliff Duren a question, and he had to go to Wikipedia to get the answer.
that's
So
right. That's right. I've got the Google open now.
that's right.
I should have
Gotta
known better.
watch it.
Should have had a score in front of me. So this is why I write in a concert key, so I don't even
Yeah.
have to wonder. It's funny,
Yeah.
even on recording sessions. That's the way I like to see a score. I like to see concert keys so I can speak to the whole orchestra,
Hmm.
in the same language, and those guys are used to that. When you're working with a church orchestra, you definitely need to talk in the key that they're in. I wouldn't
Yeah.
recommend saying to a seventh grade French horn player, "Hey, yeah, play concert F right here."
Right.
They need to think in their key for sure.
That's good. Actually, I'm just going to bring up this question. Matthew is asking any tips when looking at parts and determining whether or not younger players will be able to play. I think it's really good to be able to think about the different skill levels. So what would you think in answering that? A lot of the players that are actually available to us are coming from high schools because they're in orchestra because they have to be, right? Or it's one of their electives. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I served at Brentwood Baptist in Nashville for several years, and I'll never forget. Mike Lawrence is the instrumental director there. Mike did such a great job raising up a student orchestra, including them in several worship services throughout the year. Here at First Woodstock, Trey's doing the same thing. Our students have the option to play with our adults every Sunday, which, by the way, there's no better way for
Oh,
them to
seriously.
grow
Yeah.
as musicians than to be sitting next to somebody more experienced every
Yeah.
week. The music looks different, it sounds different than what they're playing at school. They're having to learn a lot more of it at a quicker pace.
Mm-hmm.
You spend half a semester getting a band concert ready, and then you
Yeah.
go to church and we're
You got 15
basically,
minutes.
I mean, you're playing 4 or 5 new charts,
Yeah.
every Sunday. So it's so healthy and so good for, like I look back and go, man, I would have been a much better band member at school if I had also been playing, in that church orchestra scenario on Sundays. So I can't say enough about that. Yeah, don't just limit your orchestra to adults. Find a way, find a rehearsal time for your students to be plugged in as well. But I'll never forget Mike Lawrence at Brentwood Baptist just saying, "Hey, play the notes that you can play." Um, into his string section, you've got young violinists, young cellists. Like, if it gets, just play the whole notes, or just play the half notes and the whole notes. And then the more they play, as with anything, a year later they're playing a lot more notes than they
Hmm.
were when they first started. So taking the pressure off a younger
Hmm.
musician and your students, that's a huge deal, to not make them feel like I've
Yeah.
got to own and play exactly 100% everything in front of me every Sunday. It's easy for somebody to get
Mhm.
discouraged, in the middle of that.
I think that's actually genius insight. I've never thought of that. That the orchestra is one of the unique set of instruments where you could actually say, "Hey, if you don't play everything, it's okay." As opposed to like the drummer, you can't say, "Listen, just play every other measure, and if you don't like a beat, just like leave it out. It's not a big deal. No one's gonna hear it." You can't say
Yeah,
that to the bass player. You can't say it to the vocalist. If you can't, just don't sing it. But the orchestra, they blend in, and there is that kind of capacity. So that's definitely a
Yeah.
good insight.
Yeah, raising up young rhythm section members, that's probably another broadcast. But yeah,
Hmm.
it's a really different approach because you're right. I mean, those instruments, depending what they are way more exposed. And you have to figure out some different platforms that allow them a chance to
Hmm.
play and are safe places for them to,
Hmm.
for them to fail or mess up occasionally without
Hmm.
the whole service stopping, to
That's right.
figure out what's going on. So yeah,
But I would say this is just a few of my thoughts for Matthew, who asked the question, what should I look at when determining if this is appropriate for younger players? So I would say range is definitely one. And like Cliff was saying, when you're looking at the music, is it mostly within the staff or is it way up in, the upper register or the lower register is a simple way to find the range. But that's going to be one. And then rhythm, you're going to be looking at pretty much like how many 16th and 32nd notes are there, because that's going to probably throw off some younger players. A third thing that I would say is if you're looking at a score to try to assess how exposed these players are, like are they playing on their own or are they being doubled up by, could be some other instruments or other instruments of the same kind, like are there multiple trumpet lines that they're playing the same rhythm with, all of that kind of like, if it's just like if you're singing around someone who's singing the right notes, you can kind of like flow with them, you can learn and adapt, and it just makes it easier. So anyways, those are a couple of thoughts that are practical I was thinking about.
yeah. And this is obviously a lot of work for a director, but if you don't maybe trust the discernment of a student player to know what they should try and should not, I mean, it's worth the time to quickly just mark their chart for them. Like just
Hmm.
play these sections.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you'll ever regret those efforts. In raising up more musicians and helping students become better players. So
Yeah.
it's a worthwhile investment for sure.
That's good. Well, we talked about brass before we went into some of these questions, but brass, now, like, let's just talk about the wind instruments. So the brass, for the most part, is playing off of what do you call that piece? The thing that goes over the lips.
Yeah, just the mouthpiece. Yeah.
Yeah, the mouthpiece. There you go. That's typically a brass instrument, but the wind instruments usually are playing with a reed, right? That's common
Yes,
to.
I mean, flute, you're blowing air over
Oh,
the
flute, you're
instrument.
not.
There's not a reed. There's not a reed
Yes.
involved, but yes, oboe and clarinet,
Yeah.
are reed instruments for sure,
And
as well as
saxophones.
the saxophones. Yeah, and we really didn't talk about saxophones. That's a tricky animal because in a lot of especially modern style of writing for church orchestras, pending what the song is, you may want to write. I mean, sax is maybe more of the brass family. They may be more a member of
Yeah.
the brass family than the woodwind family, especially like on songs like we're talking about that have more licks and things like that. I mean, saxophones, alto, tenor, and bari, add a lot of punch to that sound. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so they function like French horns can tend to function, more on the string side. I mean, your saxophone family can really serve your brass section well too.
Yeah, it's good to know that. So because technically you would call them the wind instruments, but I can totally understand. I mean, they're made of brass. It's like, why don't they just call these brass instruments? But they're
Yeah,
wind, but they function in that kind of sound family with the more punchy brass instruments. And then what else do we have? You got the clarinets and the flutes. These are, and the oboes, those are a bit of a softer sound, especially the oboe. You'll often find piercing through with a little bit of a melodic tones. I mean, it's a very piercing sound that comes from an oboe. It's hard to hide behind that sound. So let's just talk about a couple
yeah,
of those sounds.
yeah, yeah. So you can definitely put flute, oboe, clarinet in the same kind of family, but you're
Yeah.
right. The oboe has its own its own texture for sure. And again, range is really important. So,
Yeah.
um, and that's really the case with almost any instrument. Like how much presence you want an instrument to have, a lot of
Hmm.
that more than dynamics is the range that you're writing or that the orchestration puts those instruments in. So,
Hmm.
so yeah, just, being careful with that. I mean, so yeah, the higher your oboe part is written, I mean, you're going to hear it, for sure. It also gets more dangerous, pending your player, how high or how exposed it is in a certain moment of a song. So,
Yeah.
again, the writing, obviously, I'm thinking about this as somebody who writes a lot of notes, but how these parts are written, I think of the sound that I want to produce in an orchestration, but I also think about, who's playing these. I mean,
Hmm.
I sit in a worship service with an orchestra every week, and so I'm seeing faces when I'm writing notes. I'm thinking about, the sections of the orchestra in my church, and what's going to work well for them, what ranges are going to work well for them. So that really helps. Putting them in a spot again where they can win, where they sound good, where the parts are, playable, and the ranges are good for the common instrumentalist.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, writing for the church orchestra is quite a unique challenge because I mean, it's like if you're writing for a film score or something, you've got pro musicians. They're going to the studio. They're doing it, in their sleep. You can write whatever you want. But for a church orchestra, it's almost like you have to think. For one, I got the worship pastor who wants to sound great, and then you've got the musician who has certain player abilities that have quite a range. There's just a lot of dynamics. Definitely in praise charts, we do think a lot about trying to find that perfect ground where it's a great sound, but it's also playable, but it's also interesting, able to learn fairly quickly. So many competing needs are coming in on a Sunday morning, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and you want it's such a fine line. I mean, you've got a range of gifts. I mean, there are so many super super talented instrumentalists and church orchestras all over the place, and so you want them to have sections of songs that cause them to sit up in their seat a little bit and
Mm-hmm.
say, that's a challenge for them. But I'm also thinking at the same time about the seventh grader sitting right next to them, and how can they be a part of it too. So yeah, you're
Mm-hmm.
right. It's an interesting uh, mindset, when
Yeah,
you're
for
when you're
sure.
creating, for sure.
Okay, let's flip over to the wind instruments. It's kind of like our last of our, second last actually, because there'll be percussion too. But wind. So what's the? Did we say flute? Flute was part of the wind, or are they part of the?
Yeah,
Or
so
no? Did we just do wind? Sorry.
we just
What am
hey,
I
you're good.
thinking?
You're good. I didn't know what keys French horns played in, so we're good now. You're fine,
You got me there. Okay, we did
so
brass
the strings are
strings.
fine.
Strings was the
Yeah,
one I meant. Sorry, I told you I'm dyslexic. Okay, so let's talk about the strings because they super super sought after. I mean, we sell charts in praise charts. We sell these sections, and when you can buy these different sections if you don't want the full orchestration, but strings are like, they tower above them all as far as people want that lush, rich, modern string sound in their worship. It comes up a lot in recordings. So, how do you get that sound?
very
Tell me, Cliff.
carefully.
You need a lot of
Yeah,
them. That's what it is. You just need 100 of them, great? As opposed to like one violin, it's going to be hard to create that string sound.
yes, and I mean, I mentioned early on about the complementing your orchestra with stems or with multi tracks. I mean, it can make a small string section feel massive and feel lush. If you it's not one or the other. I think instrumentalists can be, maybe intimidated by that, or maybe, even offended. But if it's used correctly, having some of both can be a real win. It can be a win in a string
Mm-hmm.
section for intonation. Having stems in the mix. The
Mm-hmm.
the church setting can be tough for intonation in general, depending on what your stage setup looks
Yeah.
like, how close are your strings to the drummer, like how hard is it for them to hear the rest of their section. I mean, few rooms are big enough to really section off, each instrument, each family of instruments, so that everybody can hear exactly what they need to hear. So, the things like that are really important, and how you set up your orchestra is a big deal for those reasons. It's I need to set them up so it sounds good,
Mm-hmm.
in the room, but I also need to set it up where each section can hear well, and can play well in tune together.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
so
you're saying though, with strings, it can be a real benefit to doubling them up with like a stem mix. It just makes the sound so much more lush and rich and full, and really
absolutely, and
it
both
doesn't
both can
clash.
have. Oh yeah, both
Yeah.
can have presence in the mix. I mean, it's yeah. I think we're prone to think, oh, it's got to be one or the other, but
Yeah.
man, the perfect complement of both is really great, and a really great sound. And again, everybody wins. It's
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, with strings, yeah, typical setup. We write for two violin parts. Sometimes that could even be more. Appending the score. Then you have your viola instrument. They're reading, alto clef. That's its own. That's
I
its own
won't ask
animal.
you about that because I know you'll fail, Cliff.
Hey, I will. I'd also cheat at.
Yeah.
I cheat at that too. Yeah, I
Oh
write
yeah,
it treble clef, and then click
for
of a
sure.
button over to the alto clef. Then cello below viola, which man, is such a rich instrument.
Oh,
And can fill up a room with sound. They each have their own timbre and their own strengths. And your violins obviously give you a lot more tone the higher they play. But man, the cello just is is such a wide sound, almost in any part of its range. I mean, it's a
mm-hmm.
pretty phenomenal instrument as far as versatility goes. And then your arco,
The
taking care of
bass.
of the low end. Yeah, so arco, if you're looking at a score, um, is sounding an octave lower than what you're looking at on the score. So if you see a second space C on the score, and again, this is for range and for allowing them to read most of their notes on the staff, just like violas and alto clef. Um, that note, that C is really, two ledger lines below
Yeah,
the bass staff. So quite a range on the arco, and can really fill up the low end and the right spots.
yeah, but it sounds so like if you got some cellos and then that arco, I can almost feel my heart kind of vibrating with those, you know, the vibrations of that bass. It's just such a great, powerful sound. Okay, flipping over one more because I know our time is getting short here, but the percussion. So there's some extra instruments beyond the drums, and I don't know, but sometimes used very effectively, they can really, really help to make that rhythmic sound of the orchestra come alive. So what kind of instruments do you find to be most effective on the percussion side? And is this all one guy, doing four or five instruments, or do you have a couple, or what do you do?
Um, I think it's ideal for most orchestrations if you can have two or three players in your percussion section. That's going to be the easiest win. Nobody's going to have a panic attack trying to
Mm-hmm.
play, everything that's written in their part. So having one person just focus on playing timpani, and then maybe one player, maybe they have some keyboard instrument kind of chops. Maybe they play piano as well. So having them on bells and chimes, that are more playing different notes. So it's that meeting of that melodic percussion section,
Mm-hmm.
and then someone taking care of your suspended cymbal, your piatti, your tambourine, and shaker. So that's kind of the divide of the percussion families, as far
Mm-hmm.
as the way I think of them. You know, Percussionists, they're going to count more measures of rest than anybody else in the orchestra, but their impact when they play,
Mm-hmm.
it's worth the wait. It's
Seriously.
it's a mindset thing for sure, because you feel like, man, this is, I just counted 60 measures of rest, to hit this bass drum. But if you were hitting that bass drum every measure, then you lose it. You lose the impact of it when
Yeah.
you really need it in the song. And so, trying to, just coach, especially young percussionists. It's okay for you to be still. It's okay for you to not be playing something during the first verse and chorus and second verse of a song, because it's going to be worth it. Your impact on the song is going to be great, even though you don't play but for a few measures in each chart.
I can't help but think, Cliff, as you're describing that to me, it's such a parallel to life. Like, imagine lives are like that, where you could go on for years wondering, like, when your time to have an impact is, but you wait in patience for that moment to do the very thing that you were gifted and called to do. Like a triangle, like, think of that simple instrument, but in the right moment, it's has a stunning impact. And there's a lot of
Absolutely.
instruments like that. So
That's a great
so
illustration. I'm going to steal that one, Ryan.
yeah,
Use that sometime.
seriously, yeah. Yeah, and I'm going to tell my friends about how you didn't know, how to transpose instruments. So we've both got stories to come out of.
I'm going to have to start writing in
Yeah,
a non-concert
that's
key
right.
anymore. I got to get better, man. I got to get better.
Just to kind of close up, though, I often think about having a pastoral kind of outlook on this, that we're not just music directors, we're not just orchestra conductors. This is like, for the church, this is about people. It's like when you talk about a grade 7 sitting next to you, a 54-year-old, like, there's community happening, there's mentoring, there's like the church is happening. This is not just about making a great sound to sound like Spotify or something. Like, this is about people, and we're as music directors and orchestra conductors, or even if you're thinking about bringing an orchestra together, it's about creating context for people to come together, use that unique gift that they have, building community. Like, it's a bit different than the say the world outside of the church, where they're just really thinking about, we just need to create a sound, we need to record it, get in, get out, you're a studio musician, whatever you are. But um the church has a whole nother layer of meaning that I think is important. So tell me if you have any thoughts about that.
No, you really said it so well.
Hmm.
And a lot of people will be coming to your orchestra from that context, from the performance context, from the, you know, excellence all the time, no matter the cost kind of context. And it really is different. I mean, the opportunity seasoned musicians have, to mentor and encourage in a church orchestra setting. I think worship pastors and orchestra leaders, they need to speak to that as
Hmm.
much as they're speaking to notes and rhythms, because it matters. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, how many stories could we find of great musicians now who they're great because somebody poured into them in their
Yeah.
church orchestra, when they were a student. So I think it's our goal, or our calling, part of our requirement to really shepherd our people that way, to think of others, to think of how
Yeah.
can I make an impact beyond the sound coming out of my instrument.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, last couple of minutes. I'm just going to switch screens here and bring you into the world of praise charts. This is the world where we live, and we've actually got a whole section here just to sort of give a shout out to Cliff that he's done a series of these, what we call premium orchestrations. And so we have another orchestrator, actually our main full-time orchestrator in praise charts is Dan Galbraith. He's done like thousands of them, and anyone that's been in praise charts will see his name all over. So he's a legend. That's right, he is. But in addition to that, we bring in guys like Cliff to take some of these classic orchestrations that Dan has written really for the widest spectrum of players. And Cliff is just, sweetening them up a little more and stretching out some of the musicianship, making it so that each instrument has the very unique things to play that they're designed to do. So these are based on some like super amazing songs. Charity Gale, like a ton of charity songs are really appealing to churches that want to bring in the choir and orchestra. I definitely encourage you to listen to that. Even some Elevation and Maverick City songs and We the Kingdom. I mean, God So Loved. You want to take a church orchestra and make it like rock and roll. Well, there you go. Just these songs are going to make your instruments and all ages really come alive. So just kind of looking very specifically at, so you can see what they look like here. So there, when you go to it, you can see the piano vocal. And if you just click on this button up here, you can go through and just really drill into the specific parts that you're interested in. And then the various keys. I'm just going to go back to the orchestration here and show you this, is that when you're at the orchestration, there's a button here called parts. So that's where some of you are asking, well, how do I know if this is going to fit my particular, player? Well, you can go right to the Barry sax part, and you can see through the preview sign all the notes, and you can kind of get a good sense of the difficulty. You can kind of click through. If you click over to the right, you can click through and continue through into the different instruments of the orchestration. So that's what we have on praise charts, and just like real basic navigation. You can preview the song. You could even listen to it while you're looking at the music to kind of hear how it goes. And then the other thing that's quite unique is sometimes we have one key, but many times we'll have multiple keys so that you can have some options like that. So Cliff, we're super glad to have you as an extended part of our arranging network, and love the friendship. And I appreciate that you will take a little banter from me when I throw it out, because I know you throw it back too. So
I can take it, man.
That's
you're
okay.
all good here.
That's good. So I haven't offended you. I just wanted to make sure of that. So
I'm unoffendable. You have to be unoffendable on this
okay.
industry. That's for sure.
That's right.
Man.
There we go. Okay, so thank you for those of you that have joined with us and are watching later on. This has been super deep and practical, and getting into the nitty-gritty of the church orchestra and helping to grow your church and grow your people and build communities. So that's what we want to support you in. And Cliff, thank you for being with us, and love you, man, very much.
Hey, it's been a treat. Thank you so much,
All right.
Ryan.
See you then. Bye.